There's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in.
All right. Open up the door. Starts right now. So fling wide, you heavenly gates. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ, and he heard a sound behind him. And he said, I looked, and there was a door standing open in heaven, and I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us, the things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now as I speak. Those are the things this broadcast is all about. Those are things I talk about on a weekly basis, discussing the issues of the day, discerning the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and worldview. Good afternoon, everybody. Andy White here, and what you are about to hear is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. Good afternoon once again, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. And I stress, spherical globe, for all of my friends who are flat earthers out there. Hey, do me a favor. Let me know if you are listening, and please go on over to the Open Up the Doors Facebook page at facebook.com/FaithFM 91.7, where I am also streaming live on Facebook Live. Join in the conversation on Facebook Live, and let us know where you're listening from. Get a conversation going. It's great to be able to interact with people. I'm looking to have the best interactive experience here on Open Up the Doors that I can have. And I need you guys in the audience to really be actively engaged. And you can leave me some posts, leave me some comments, leave me some questions and thoughts over there on Facebook Live. If you'd like to email me, you can also email me at ajwhite777@icloud.com. It's ajwhite777@icloud.com. And we are streaming on the internet. If you're outside of the Faith FM broadcast area, we are streaming on the internet at hamptonschristian.com. That's www.hamptonschristian.com. If you happen to be just sitting at work and you want to listen on the internet, you want to listen from your computer there, go on over to hamptonschristian.com. Well, this past Sunday, of course, I think everybody ought to know this. Maybe some people don't know this. Maybe some people aren't paying attention. And if you're not paying attention, you ought to be. But this past Sunday, of course, Hanukkah began at sundown. And Hanukkah will continue through the week until Monday, December 10th is the last day of Hanukkah. So I want to say happy Hanukkah to all of my Jewish friends out there. And I pray blessings upon you. I pray you have a happy and joyous week, a happy and joyous Hanukkah. Enjoy the Festival of Lights. I pray that you may know him who is the light of the world. And I'm going to, the things I'm going to bring forth today are really going to be centered around what Hanukkah is. And a lot of people might not know that the word Hanukkah itself means dedication. Technically, it's the feast of dedication. When the Maccabees, we read about what happened in the books of Maccabees. They fought against Antiochus Epiphanes and recaptured and cleansed and rededicated the temple after it had been profaned by the Syrians under then conquering king Antiochus Epiphanes. I'm really going to get into more of that next week in greater detail. But just to give you some background, because I want to lay out some things of where I'm going with this today. It is the Feast of Dedication, as I said. The rededication of the temple. And Hanukkah always begins, this is fascinating, it really is. Hanukkah always begins on the 25th of Kislev on the Jewish calendar. That is the day that Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated the temple in 168 BC. But 3 years later, to the day, the exact day, in 165 BC. The Maccabees had defeated Antiochus. They had pushed the Syrians out of Jerusalem. They had retaken the temple 3 years later, and it was the same exact day that the temple was desecrated that it was also rededicated, as I said, 3 years later, in 165 BC. The temple was cleansed and rededicated to the Lord. The statue of Zeus was thrown out. The altar where they had slain the pig was cleansed. And again, I want to emphasize that a lot of traditions have come in to Hanukkah, with all, as could be said with all of our various holidays, that have some meaning and some deterrence away from the actual events of what happened. But I want to stress that Hanukkah means dedication, and the Jewish tradition teaches, and it's not so much Jewish tradition, it's really kind of true, because you can read about this in Leviticus chapter 8. But Jewish tradition teaches that in the original dedication of the tabernacle of Moses, Aaron and his sons were anointed on the last day and consecrated for their priestly services. Again, you can read about that in Leviticus 8. I thought that was a nice little bit of a side issue there. But it all has to do with consecration. It all has to do with dedication. And I'm saying all that because I want to get us to this point. I came across a report last week that was put out by Breaking Israel News. It came out just last week around, I believe it was around November 29th or something. But the report that was put out by Breaking Israel News was headlined this way: Sanhedrin in Israel. The Sanhedrin invites 70 nations to Hanukkah dedication of altar for the third temple. Now, of course, that caught my attention when I saw that headline, the dedication of the altar for the third temple. I'm going to highlight some excerpts from this report, from this article, and I'm going to comment on them as I go along here. But the article says that the nascent Sanhedrin released a declaration to the 70 nations for Hanukkah. Now, side note, 70 nations. The Jews believe that there are 70 nations in the world. We know there's more nations than that, but basically the idea of 70 nations means the entire world. That God instituted Israel, obviously, as his own separate people, and that the Gentile nations consisted of 70 nations. And it's just really symbolic of the entire globe. And the Sanhedrin released this declaration to the world, you could say, for Hanukkah to be read at a ceremony in Jerusalem on the last day of the holiday. That's the reason I brought up the consecration of the priests in Leviticus 8 and how Jewish tradition, and this is why they're doing it on the last day, by the way, because Aaron in the priesthood was dedicated on the last day of that original, when Moses built the tabernacle in the wilderness, the original tabernacle with the Ark of the Covenant, where the priestly service began originally. So they're dedicating this altar on that same day. And the article goes on, which will be Monday, by the way, this coming Monday, December 10th. The ceremony will include the consecration of a stone altar prepared for the use in the third temple. So this isn't something that they're just kind of going through some kind of like a little play or like a little cantata. This is an actual real live prophetic event going on right in front of us, folks. And this is highly significant. We are in the 70th year. We are in the 70th year of the rebirth of the nation of Israel. And they are dedicating the altar of sacrifice for the temple. And I want to tell you something. Hardly anyone has talked about this. I've hardly seen this anywhere. But this is really, I think personally, this is really extremely significant. There has not been an altar on the Temple Mount in over 2,000 years. And we're in the 70th year, as I said, which is significant in and of itself. How this isn't really being talked about more in a lot of the prophetic forums I'm part of. I don't know. I was kind of scratching my head about that a little bit. But let me go on from the article. The article goes on to state that the altar is currently in the form of loose stone blocks ready to be transported to the Temple Mount and stored in a manner that will enable them to be transported and assembled at a moment's notice. So they're going to be having this ceremony on this coming Monday, but the way they've designed the altar right now, it's sort of, they haven't cemented it all together. They haven't made it permanent in the place they're going to have the ceremony, because it is being designed for its final place when they rebuild the temple, which I'm going to be getting into in quite a moment, in a little bit of time here. But I want to continue with this article. The decision to prepare the blocks and all the details of their composition is the result of a long study performed by the members of the Sanhedrin in conjunction with the Temple Institute. A full-dressed reenactment of the Korban ala Tamid, that's the daily offering, will take place. I need to say this again. This coming Monday, a full-dressed reenactment. They're going to be in the priestly garb as described in the book of Leviticus. The Korban Olah Tamid, the daily offering, will take place. Remember, folks, because I'm laying out a scenario here on purpose. It's the daily sacrifice that the Antichrist will cause to cease when he breaks the covenant he makes with Israel. You can read about that in Daniel 8:11 and 11:31. But right now, they are beginning to reinstitute the daily sacrifice. Again, from the article, Kohanim, those are the priests, wearing biblically mandated garb, will lead the ceremony. Now, here's where it gets into some of the interesting particulars. According to the report, the location is still unclear as the Jerusalem municipality is weighing security concerns that a Jewish ceremony of this sort will precipitate Muslim violence if performed in view of the Temple Mount. Remember, right now as it stands, Jews aren't allowed to even pray on the Temple Mount. But the Muslims won't allow the Jews to even pray on the Temple Mount. Now they want to set up an altar and sacrifice. They will eventually, because there will be a temple eventually. But right now, they're starting to do it someplace down in the lower level. But here is the question. Where are they going to actually have this ceremony this coming Monday? Also at question, this is somewhat humorous, also at question is whether the Kohanim will ritually slaughter a lamb or whether prepared meat will be brought. Though the Sanhedrin has received all the necessary permits from the government organizations in charge of slaughtering animals, they are still waiting for the municipality to approve that part of the ceremony. In either case, the meat will be roasted on the newly consecrated altar. Now, you got to picture this for a moment, folks. Can you imagine for one moment? This is 2018. We've got worldwide internet and cameras. And can you imagine how apoplectic people like PETA, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, can you imagine how crazy they're going to go? And all the leftists are going to go bonkers when they start seeing cute little lambs, cute little lammies being slaughtered and burnt for sacrificial offerings. You think the Jews are hated now? Oh, just wait. It's going to be interesting this coming Monday to see if they live slaughter these little lambs, or if they play the political correctness part and maybe chill out a bit and just order some lamb chops from the local butcher and we'll roast them. Hello? It's going to be fun to watch. I hope somebody covers this Monday. I hope that, and hopefully Breaking Israel News will cover this. Hopefully, because I am really curious. Are they going to slaughter a lamb and video it and capture it and offer up this sacrifice from a live lamb? Now, they're supposed to. They're supposed to. But let's see. They may just order some lamb chops from the local butcher. We'll see. We'll see on Monday, folks. Stand by. It's going to be fun to watch, no matter what happens. But this is exciting. This is just really totally exciting to me. I'm going to get back to the article just for a few more minutes here. From the article, it states, a large menorah will be lit as part of the ceremony. Well, of course it will be, because it's the feast of Hanukkah, the feast of dedication, and there were several menorahs in the temple. So a large menorah will be lit as part of the ceremony. Now, Rabbi Hillel Weiss explained the significance of the ceremony being held on the last day of Hanukkah, which is something I kind of alluded to already. But to quote this rabbi, according to Jewish tradition, the tabernacle and Aaron the priest were consecrated for service on the last day of Hanukkah. Now, I thought his wording was a little strange, honestly, because actually Hanukkah didn't exist then when Moses built the tabernacle in the wilderness. Hanukkah was not one of the original 7 feasts of the Lord. Hanukkah did not come into existence, as I said, until 165 BC when the Maccabees rededicated the temple. So I found it interesting that this rabbi would use the word Hanukkah, except, again, maybe he's simply just using it for what the word means, dedication. According to Jewish tradition, the tabernacle and Aaron the priest were consecrated for service on the last day of dedication, which is true. But Rabbi Weiss explained to Breaking Israel News, again, quote, "It is fitting that we should invite the nations to the ceremony, since Hanukkah is about bringing light to the darkness." Oh, yes, indeed. The Jews were meant to do this for the entire world, he said. And then he quotes out of the prophet Isaiah, out of Isaiah 49:6. And here's the quote. Out of Isaiah, "For he has said, is it too little that you should be my servant, and that I raise you up, O tribes of Jacob, and restore the survivors of Israel? I will also make you a light of the nations, that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth." Folks, when you read Isaiah chapter 49, it is evident and plain in the context that it's not talking about Israel. It's talking about the Messiah. Isaiah 49, most of the ancient rabbis, you can look them up in the Talmud, you can look them up in the Babylonian Talmud, in the Tanakh, the old commentators, almost without fail, all the ancient rabbis understood that Isaiah 49 was talking about the Messiah. But modern rabbis like to claim that this is speaking of the nation of Israel. But again, the context clearly reveals it's not speaking of the nation, but of the Messiah. And I would encourage you to go back and read Isaiah chapter 49. He does say, "Israel, my servant," but remember, Israel means Prince of God. Isaiah 49 is talking about the real Israel, the real Prince of God, who is the Messiah, because the Messiah is the consummate personification of what it means to be Israel. Yes, it is true. They were supposed to be a light unto the world. Yes, it is true that Israel was supposed to show the Gentiles what God was like. But we all know they failed miserably. And even in the context of Isaiah 49, where it talks about, "I've called you to bring Israel back to me." So even their modern day construct doesn't make any sense. You're calling Israel to bring Israel back to the Lord. It's the Messiah who brings Israel back to the Lord. But I don't want to digress too much regarding this. But I just wanted to address what this Rabbi Weiss had said. Because the Messiah, he is the Son of God. He is the Prince of God. He is Israel's salvation and Redeemer. The servant is not Israel the nation, but Israel the Prince of God, who brings Jacob and gathers the nation back to the Father. It is he who is a light to the Gentiles. It is he, the one who is salvation, Yeshua, to the ends of the earth. The very verse you quote, dear Rabbi, the very verse you quote contains his name. The rabbi quoted Isaiah 49:6, that my Yeshua in the Hebrew, that my Yeshua may reach the ends of the earth. It sends goosebumps up my back. Yes, Yeshua. Going back to that article, the rabbi says the Jews were brought back to Israel for the purpose of spreading the light to the nations. As the sages instructed the Jews to pray every day, this is Rabbi Weiss I'm quoting, a new light will shine upon Zion. And we should all merit to this light very soon. Oh, yes, I pray you do. I pray you do. Rabbi. Rabbi, I pray you do come to the light very soon. The rabbi says the light is Torah, the light of Torah which comes from Zion, which reveals the hidden aspects of God. And with all due respect, Rabbi Weiss, I want to tell you, the true light is he that gives light to the world. We read in the Gospel of John that in him was life, speaking of Yeshua. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness. And the darkness does not comprehend it. That word comprehend in the Greek is paralambano. It means to get a handle on it, to lay hold of it. The darkness can't get a handle on the light. Those who are in darkness cannot get a handle on the fact of Jesus, the Messiah. But John writes that Jesus, Yeshua, as Isaiah prophesied, he may be the salvation unto the whole world. And John writes in his gospel verse, chapter 1, verse 9, Yeshua, Jesus is the true light. He is the true light, which gives light to every man coming into the world. I'll be back in a moment, folks. Here's third day, Jesus, the light of the world. On this Hanukkah week, the Festival of Lights. Third day, Jesus, light of the world. Welcome back. You are listening to Open Up the Doors here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Napeague, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. And I'm also, if you're just joining us now at the bottom of the hour here almost, I am streaming live on my Facebook page at facebook.com, FaithFM 91.7. If you'd like to join in the conversation over there, on Facebook, please join in the conversation. Let us know where you are listening from, where you are watching from. I appreciate it so very much. But I want to continue to build on some of these thoughts that I've been sharing about Hanukkah, about the dedication, the rededication of the temple. And I want to share some thoughts about the rebuilding of the temple. Now, I want to say some things before I get into this. I normally really don't like to speculate on things. But this is one of those areas where really all we can do is speculate. So I want to lay out some things here right at the top. There will definitely be a third temple. There's no doubt regarding that. The real question is when will it be built? And to that, there's a lot of different schools of thought. There's a lot of different controversies. There's a lot of different opinions. So I'm just gonna add to that cacophony of opinions today with that, because that's the real question. When will it be built? That seems to be, even in Israel, by the way, even in Israel, there are different factions as to the timing of the rebuilding of the temple. Many Orthodox rabbis firmly believe that only the Messiah can rebuild the temple. There is this controversy in Israel between the rabbis that are involved with the Temple Mount Association and the Orthodox Jews, because the rabbis in the Temple Mount Association, they want to start rebuilding the temple like yesterday, but the Orthodox, like I said, they only believe the Messiah can rebuild the temple. So again, there are these different opinions and viewpoints, and it has been generally assumed, and I will stress assumed, because the more you look into it, it's an assumption, but it has generally been assumed and inculcated into most of us who are evangelical Christians that the third temple must be built and be in existence before the return of Jesus. To be sure, there are some very good reasons for that position. However, last year I began to think about this a lot, because last year, back during the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, I did some broadcasts regarding Sukkot. And I was sharing about last year how they had celebrated tabernacles up on the Temple Mount. This was last year. For the first time in 2,000 years, they were allowed to go up to the Temple Mount to celebrate Sukkot. And I really started thinking about this a lot, really about a year ago. And I never really had an opportunity to share some of the thoughts and some of the research I was doing. And folks, there is so much history out there, so many things that have been lost through time and history. But I don't want to digress with that right now. But about a year ago, I began to ponder if it was actually really necessary to rebuild the temple before the return of Jesus. Now, we have assumed it is, because, for instance, Jesus mentions the abomination of desolation being in the holy place. But that's just the point. He doesn't say in the temple. You don't need a temple structure to fulfill that prophecy. In Matthew 24:15, listen to the wording very carefully. There's two places where Jesus talked about the abomination of desolation, in Matthew and in Mark. In Matthew, it's worded this way: therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, and then he says, flee to those who are in the rooftops, flee. In Mark, he says it this way: so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not. The point here is this: the whole Temple Mount area is considered the holy place. Jesus specifically didn't say standing in the temple. He used the phraseology holy place. So that broadens it out a little bit. The whole Temple Mount is considered the holy place. In fact, you can even read that in Ezekiel, I think it's 40, might be 45 or 46, where the millennial temple is described, and it talks about the whole mountaintop being the holy place. But here's the thing: the Dome of the Rock is a de facto abomination of desolation. As long as that's there, they can't rebuild the temple. That's what we've been told anyway, for the most part. That's what we think, and that's what I've believed for the longest time. And it may still be true. I'm going to play around with some ideas here, folks, today, to get us thinking a little bit out of our boxes. But there is, and I've done a lot of research on this, way, way more than I can share in this broadcast. But there is increasing evidence that perhaps the Dome of the Rock might not be on the right rock. The Holy of Holies was on the threshing floor of Ornan. And again, there's some archaeological studies going on that are suggesting that might not be the Dome of the Rock. But being neither here nor there about that, I don't want to get too much down that rabbit hole. But I'm going to share some things I think are fascinating. But here's the thing, and here's why I started toying around with some theories, if I could word it that way, toying around with some plausible scenarios. Because according to the Temple Mount Institute, everything right now, everything is ready for the sacrifices, and that's key. When asked if the Maccabee spontaneous temple service could be duplicated today, Rabbi Israel Ariel, a member of the Sanhedrin and founder of the Temple Institute, answered emphatically in the affirmative. This was actually from an article a year ago in Breaking Israel News. To quote Rabbi Israel Ariel, quote, "Everything we need is ready." Rabbi Ariel told Breaking Israel News. But given the total lack of a temple structure, the rabbi's claim needed some substantiation. But according to Rabbi Israel Ariel, quote, "An actual temple is not needed. An altar can be constructed at the site of the original altar on the Temple Mount." Now again, here we've got some controversy. Is the original altar where the Dome of the Rock is? or is it in a different place on the Temple Mount? And there's increasing evidence that it actually might be. The actual threshing floor of Ornan might actually be about 600 feet away from the Dome of the Rock. And I'm just getting this out there to share some thoughts, because is the existence... Now again, I said earlier that there are different schools of thought on this. Is the existence of a standing structural temple an unmitigated necessity during the tribulation period? Or is it plausible that there could possibly be an alternative set of circumstances that completely satisfies the prophetic scriptures, yet without the commonly assumed presumption that there must be a tribulation period temple? I'm using that word on purpose. Remember, the Orthodox believe only Messiah can rebuild the temple. Maybe they're right. Maybe the temple will be really rebuilt when Jesus comes back, but maybe there'll be some semblance of it. Maybe it'll be begun before the tribulation. I'm just toying with some ideas here. If there is a plausible alternative scenario, that would mean we don't necessarily need to be waiting for the tribulation temple to be built. I know a lot of people are waiting for the tribulation temple to be built. Again, we know that there will be a millennial temple, because Ezekiel 40 through 48 shows us that in great detail. But perhaps, just maybe, the actual temple structure won't be rebuilt until Jesus comes back and destroys the Antichrist kingdom along with the Dome of the Rock. If the Antichrist is Islamic, as I believe he is, he'll break his covenant with the Jews and the sacrificial system as he stands. And I could picture this. I could picture him standing in front of the Dome of the Rock and breaking the covenant, the abomination of desolation that is sitting on the Temple Mount. Some folks don't think that Ezekiel 40 through 48 is actually speaking about a literal millennial temple. There is a stream of people out there that think it's just a spiritual allegory, but I don't buy into that for this reason. There's too much detail. If it was just an allegory, Ezekiel spent a lot of space and a lot of time going into great detail, 8 chapters of intense detail about this temple that it's never been fulfilled in history. What is described in Ezekiel 40 through 48 has no prior fulfillment in history. And after the millennium, when God creates a new heaven and a new earth, and a new Jerusalem comes down from heaven, John tells us in Revelation that there is specifically no temple there. So it really seems to me that the temple in Ezekiel 40 through 48 has to be and must be Jesus' temple, the throne of his government. I'm going to get into that a little bit. So, again, I have a theory regarding the tribulation. And, folks, it's just a theory I'm toying around with. It's just a speculative, alternative theory that I think is plausible. I don't want anybody, going apoplectic or pulling their hair out because I'm fiddling around with what they believe. It's just something I've been thinking about. I'm not positing my theory is some absolute doctrine. It's just a theory. They may build the temple next year for all I know, next to the Dome of the Rock for all I know. Like I said, there are some who believe that the temple is actually about 600 or about 50 yards away. So, again, it's speculation. How these things are going to play out, I don't exactly know. But I am seeing some alternative possibilities that are plausible. Because I can envision this, folks. I can envision Israel becoming completely surrounded militarily by the OIC. I've shared about this. The Organization of Islamic Countries that really is the military arm of the Kingdom of the Beast. I see Israel getting completely surrounded militarily, and they are forced into signing a peace agreement. But perhaps that peace agreement at least gives them access to the Temple Mount to do their priestly service. Remember what Rabbi Israel Ariel said. Everything is ready for the sacrifices to begin. He never said they needed a structural temple. What they need is the location. Either way, in my theory, well, this isn't really my theory. This is what the scripture says, that the little horn enters into a covenant, but in the middle of the week, he breaks the covenant and causes the sacrifices, the daily sacrifices, to cease. That's why in the first block I mentioned the daily sacrifice is going to be little by little begun, and they're going to reenact it this coming Monday. I can see the Antichrist, the man of sin, the megalomaniac, the caliph of the Muslim world, the beast of Revelation 13. I can see him standing in front of the Dome of the Rock, breaking his covenant with Israel and throwing them off the Temple Mount and declaring himself God and ruler of this world. I really can envision that. And by the way, that pretty much describes what the Mahdi, according to the Islamist writings, is going to do. I've got to take a break. I've got so much more here. And I knew this was going to happen, but I got to take a break here. I'm way over time here. Folks, stick around. I'll be back in a few minutes. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Epi, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. Thanks for joining in, everybody, to this week's edition of Open Up the Doors. As I said, the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. I am Facebook streaming live. And I would thank you all if you would just go on over there as I smack my mic and I get very boisterous here behind this microphone. What did I say? Facebook.com/FaithFM91 is my Open Up the Doors Facebook page. Hey, if you've never liked the page, please like the page and, just stay connected with all we're doing here at Faith FM. Well, bless the Lord, bless the Lord, bless the Lord. So I'm looking at all my notes here. I got a little bit of housekeeping to do here on this computer while I'm bloviating. Give me a second here while I'm bloviating. I gotta remove a couple of things that automatically loaded into the queue. I'm just talking out loud as I'm doing stuff here. But I'm looking at my notes, seeing where I want to pick up because I got so much stuff I want to get to. I do want to get to something here because I was talking about the last block about the Dome of the Rock. There are different views about it. Is it actually sitting where the Holy of Holies was? Will the Antichrist actually, does there need to be a physical structural temple for the fulfillment of the scripture? Maybe yes, maybe no. I do see some alternate scenarios, but I want to give you some things I found very interesting very quickly before I move on. To something else I want to touch on before I run out of time. The original Dome of the Rock, well, the Dome of the Rock was built in 691. I read some really interesting articles just yesterday that I can't get into, but a couple of these articles were actually positing the theory that in fact, let me read it a little bit. I have to read this. One of the biggest misconceptions, this is from an article out of a blog site, Israel Rising. The author is David Mark, and his title is Temple Mount Solution. History shows that Islam shared the Dome of the Rock with the Jews, something I had never heard before, but I actually found several articles along these lines. And he says one of the biggest misconceptions about the cyclical tumult on the Temple Mount is that the shrine called the Dome of the Rock, built in 691 by the Umayyad Caliphate, is a mosque. Nothing can be further from the truth. Under the later Islamic period, the Dome of the Rock was never treated as a mosque. Mosques point to Mecca. The Dome of the Rock does not. And he goes on with this article talking about how the Caliph of Damascus, a guy by the name of Abd el-Malik, was actually very friendly to the Jews, and his theory, and he's positing this as more of a theory. He's positing this as a fact that this Caliph Abd el-Malik actually built the Dome of the Rock as a house of prayer for Jews. I have never heard that in my life. I was fascinated when I read this just last night. And there's actually, once I started going down this bunny trail, there is some history that has been lost regarding that. But I wanted to bring that out because it was very interesting. But the original Dome of the Rock collapsed in an earthquake in 1015, and it was rebuilt within a decade. And after the Crusaders captured Jerusalem in 1099, the Dome of the Rock became a church. I never knew that either. The Knights Templar claimed the dome was the site of the Temple of Solomon, and you ready for this? They called it Templum Domini. In other words, the Temple of God. I almost fell out of my chair when I read that last night, because I have never, ever, ever considered the Dome of the Rock the Temple of God, and I don't. To me, it's the abomination of desolation, de facto thereabouts, because the Jews can't go up there. The place is desolate. But I'm bringing out some history here that is very intriguing, to say the least. The Knights Templar, the Crusaders, believed that this structure was sitting on the temple site of Solomon, and they called it the Temple of God. When Jerusalem was captured by Saladin, who was another caliph, the Dome of the Rock was reconsecrated as a Muslim shrine. The cross on top was replaced by a crescent. I found this incredible. Somebody put out a study, a Jewish guy years ago, Yaakov Ofer, did research, and he said the shrine was originally a Jewish house of prayer. After the Abbasid kingdom defeated the Umayyad kingdom, the memory of the last house of prayer for the Jews was erased, and the name of the pro-Jewish caliph, Abd al-Malik, was removed because they thought he was a heretic, and replaced with the name of the Abbasid ruler. The point is this. History I never knew, that the Dome of the Rock was considered a house of prayer for the Jews, and that the Knights Templar called it the Temple of God. Maimonides is a famous and well-respected ancient Jewish rabbi. He lived in the early 1000s. But Maimonides wrote in 1165, he visited Jerusalem, and his quote is this: "I got to pray at the great holy house on the place of the Holy of Holies." That was the Dome of the Rock. And he considered that the great holy house. Obviously, these ancients were of the opinion that the Dome of the Rock was sitting on the site of the Holy of Holies. Now, today, some think that's wrong. Some believe, through further excavations and archaeological evidence, that it's actually not the site. But my point is this. It's got a history that is a little bit more illustrious than I had originally ever heard about before. And to add to the mystery, and I'm running out of time, I want to get to this because it is connected. But I came across an article the other day about the Ark of the Covenant. And for some time, for many years, there's been a group of people, a group of monks down in Ethiopia who have claimed to have the Ark of the Covenant. But a new article came out, and this was the title: Ark of the Covenant may be hidden in Africa, biblical scholars believe. Biblical scholars believe the legendary Ark of the Covenant may have landed in Africa after it was taken out of Israel. That's not a new idea. Most rabbis believe that Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant with him when he fled to Egypt. You could see about Jeremiah's fleeing to Egypt when the Babylonians were conquering Jerusalem and burning down the temple. The second temple was being burnt down by the Babylonians. I'm sorry, that was the first temple. First temple was being burnt down by the Babylonians. Tradition says that Jeremiah got the Ark of the Covenant and fled to Egypt with it. That is tradition. There's no proof of it, but it seems to make a little bit of sense. I don't have the time to go through this whole article, but the article basically talks about the possibility of the Ark being in this place, a city of Axum, in a church there. I found some of this to be a little bit humorous. Oh, by the way, the people that did this is the Bible Archaeology Search and Exploration Institute. The acronym is BASE, the Bible Archaeology Search and Exploration Institute. And they went there to see if they could see this. And according to their website, quote, as unusual as this may sound, the base team has uncovered compelling evidence that the ark may well have been spirited up the Nile River to an eventual resting place in the remote highlands of modern-day Ethiopia. I'm running out of time. I can't get into all this. The bottom line is this. This is funny. There's a guy there that guards the Ark of the Covenant. It's supposedly in a building with a fence around it. And these archaeologists, these scientists claim to have spoken to a man at the church who was, quote, the guardian of the Ark of the Covenant, who spends his life inside a fenced-off area surrounding the church and claimed that no one can enter in. Back in 2007, the Smithsonian Institute sent a delegation there, and this guy said, I am the guardian of the Ark. I have no other name. Pretty mysterious. Could probably make a movie about that. I think they did. But anyway, I have to go. I have to move along here. I'm running out of time. There can be no doubt. I'm saying this for this reason, because we're talking about the rebuilding of the temple. But the Ark of the Covenant, which was the in the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, which had the manifest presence of God upon it, disappeared after the destruction of Solomon's temple. I don't think a lot of people realize this. Nehemiah's temple, Zerubbabel's temple, the temple in Jesus' day, there was no Ark of the Covenant in there. And we read how when Jesus was crucified on the cross, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And what was behind that curtain? Nothing. Did you ever stop to think about that? Is the Ark in Ethiopia the real Ark? I don't know. Nobody knows. It's possible. There's no way to prove it one way or the other without being allowed to inspect it, which will never happen. Most likely it's probably just a replica. But here's the thing. If the Jews do manage to build a third temple, you would expect and you would think that they would strive to bring that ark back to the temple if it's a legitimate artifact. But I tend to think that will not happen. Because amazingly enough, the millennial temple of Ezekiel 40 through 48 conspicuously lacks and never even mentions the Ark of the Covenant as being there. And all of this coincides with Jeremiah 3:16 when it says, then it shall come to pass when you are multiplied and increased in the land in those days, says the Lord, they will say no more the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. It shall not come to mind, nor shall they remember it, nor shall they visit it, nor shall it be made any more. At that time, Jerusalem shall be called the throne of the Lord, and all the nations shall be gathered to it, to the name of the Lord, to Jerusalem. No more shall they follow the dictates of their own evil hearts. Jeremiah is basically saying the Ark of the Covenant is really basically done away with. The Ark of the Covenant was brought up to Solomon's temple from the home of Obed-Edom with great pomp and circumstance when they built Solomon's temple. Yet during the building and the restoration of the temple by Nehemiah and Zerubbabel, the ark is never even mentioned. That coincides with Jeremiah 3:16. The silence is deafening. Some people say that the real ark is in heaven, but that's really irrelevant because the entire tabernacle was a copy of the things made in heaven. We know there's an ark in heaven, but we read in Hebrews how everything that Moses did was made according to the copies of the things in the heavens. And I'm rushing through this. I know I am. I have a stack of stuff here, but I'm keeping an eye on the clock. But I got into a conversation with somebody the other day who was saying about how the Ark of the Covenant is in heaven. And it's really kind of not the point. Hebrews 9 tells us, therefore it was necessary that the copies of the things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has not entered the holy place made with hands, which are copies of the true, but into heaven itself. Folks, the bottom line is this. The bottom line is this. Jesus, the light of the world, is Messiah and King. And he's returning one day, and he's going to rule from Mount Zion. That's what the new temple is going to be. The new temple is going to be the seat of his government over all the earth for 1,000 years. Ezekiel 43:7 says, speaking of the Holy of Holies, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel. Folks, in that day, there will be a temple. It's just a question of when it will be built. But in that day, When Jesus returns, he will set up his government from that temple. And the words of the prophet Micah will be fulfilled. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills. And people shall flow to it. Many nations shall come and say, let us come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion the law shall go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and rebuke the strong nations afar off. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. We are living in exciting times, folks. And I am so sorry I have to go. But I hope you got something out of this today. I hope I gave you something to think about. At any rate, keep it right here on Faith FM. A lot of great Christian programming coming up. 24/7.